One of the more memorable titles to come out of 2015 was Dying Light, this odd Dead Island / Mirror's Edge hybrid that generally came away with middling to decent review scores without really causing any shitstorms or activating any almonds. While it does have a small fanbase that regards it with very high praise, I can't help but feel it was underappreciated during its time near release, garnering damnable scores from big review sites such as 8.5 and 7, the IGN and GameStop equivalents of butt crack and dog shit. Big Daddy Yahtzee Croshaw praised the game as being Dead Island but not ass, and while I do generally agree with that sentiment, I still feel like that's brushing over the finer strokes of what Dying Light was trying to accomplish beyond simply improving upon the first-person zombie game formula. Approaching the game from a pure outsider's perspective, it first appears to be this gorgeous, free-roaming zombie fest with a strong emphasis on parkour and melee combat, and the actual game lives up to those expectations fairly well. The free running is fast-paced and satisfying, the melee is weighty and visceral as all fuck, and we can actually enjoy this time without all the clunkiness and input lag brought on by the hardware limitations that plague the console releases of Dead Island. Even the game's story is ambitious, foregoing a simple narrative in favor of delving deep into the personal struggles of the characters within the quarantine, even delivering some really potent emotional moments and the occasional narrative subversion. With everything said and done, Dying Light was looking to be my definitive game of the year, but after that initial 10-hour honeymoon phase, the magic starts to wear off and you start to notice the holes in the facade. The map that the second half of the game takes place in isn't nearly as interesting or dynamic as the first. You eventually give up hope on Crane being anything other than a one-dimensional blank slate that occasionally dispenses a bit of lamp shading. The combat eventually stops being challenging, the rewards become less rewarding, the villain reveals himself to be just a retarded dumbass, and the whole experience generally just was really stale. And after I finished the game and was silently brewing in hatred over the shit ending, I started to realize just how many opportunities the game missed in terms of simple design and structure. Those first hours held so much promise, but everything else sort of just crumbles apart once the game falls back entirely on its primary mechanics. Mechanics which are by no means bad, but simply not deep or involving enough to hold the experience up on their own. Once you've seen everything the game has to offer, it just sort of turns into a brown smear past the halfway point. It goes from an 8 to a 6 to flaming garbage at the very end, and leaves me with a lot to think about in terms of how this game could have been salvaged. First of all, let's address the most obvious issue. The whole game takes place in the shitty, rundown Turkish city called Haran, and the first question I have to ask myself pertaining to the game's setting is just why? If there was a single thing that Dead Island benefited from, it was a great setting. The tropical resort of Benoy was an amazing location, dynamic in its design and beautiful in terms of aesthetics. The game nailed the resort atmosphere, everything from the swaying shadows of the palm trees to the texture of the sand nailed this warm, vibrant aesthetic. But eventually, you leave the resort and travel to this really awful looking city area where you basically spend the second act of the game wading through sewers and navigating this hideous urban landscape. It looks incredibly bland, every part of the city looks the same, and overall the location is incredibly dull and uninspired. And of all settings, I have no idea why they decided to retread this one for Dying Light. While the game's urban jungle is considerably more diverse and greater in scope than any location in Dead Island, I just do not understand why it went for this gross orange and brown slums aesthetic. It completely clashes with the goofy, fun nature of the gameplay and characters, and it is not the kind of place that you want to be staring at for upwards of 25 hours over your playthrough. And it wouldn't even have to sacrifice the location to make the game a bit more visually pleasing. There are plenty of games out there with vibrant, beautiful urban landscapes. Grand Theft Auto, Infamous, and other open-world games based in cities have proven that it's possible to make urban environments look fantastic without sacrificing a realistic aesthetic. Tom Clancy's The Division proved only a year later that a game can still feel desolate and apocalyptic while also being downright gorgeous, controversy be damned. There are certain parts of this game that look just fine. They pretty much nail the way the game looks at night, and speaking from a purely technical standpoint, the game's graphics are amazing. But thanks to the dull palette and poorly considered aesthetic, the game has firmly cemented itself in my mind as the brown one from 2015. You basically start off whittling away at zombies with lead pipes and firecrackers until the third act of the game, whereupon you become a god that can insta-kill basically everything in one hit. It's like if you looked at Morrowind or Terraria's amazing progression systems and just took out the entire middle part. I can point to several specific points in the game where there is a massive shift in the difficulty level, most of them being downwards. The grappling hook turns navigation into a joke and completely negates the point of the parkour system, one of the most vital elements of the game. The ability to camouflage yourself in zombie guts takes away all of the challenge from tasks such as collecting airdrops, while also allowing you to basically walk through certain parts of the game effortlessly. Obtaining a gun means that you are immediately able to instantly kill enemies that would have been challenging just moments before. These huge advantages that come out of nowhere completely throw off the game's balance and turn the entire second half into a joke. My grandma's dick is harder than this, and she's dead. What the game should have done was balance the upgrade perks in a way that the more convenient quality of life abilities come first, such as the abilities to set off traps and execute enemies from behind. As the game is, both of these abilities come at a later time where they are essentially useless thanks to the weapons you have at that point, allowing you to instantly kill most enemies without the need for environmental traps and stealth. In the early game, these abilities could have proven as more risky, difficult alternatives when you're running low on supplies.
But Rosie, why don't you just turn up the difficulty since you think the game is so easy near the end? Are you really such a sad nerd that you have to make up non-existent problems instead of finding real ones, complaining about issues that the game has obvious solutions to? Just like when you complained about Skyrim being too easy on expert difficulty even though there's difficulty above that? Just turn the difficulty up, you fucking racist.
Gosh darn, Kirby's Epic Yarn is too damn easy. Why don't I just put electric clamps on my nipples and hold the controller with my feet? Simply raising the difficulty completely invalidates all the progress you've made in the game and is no excuse for the developers not to simply balance the gameplay. The second improvement would be to simply remove the more unbalanced perks, such as the ability to instantly kill any down zombies and the grappling hook, however fun it may be to use. And I know, this is going to sound completely insane, but does this game really need to have guns in it? Like, at all? It would not be difficult to provide a reason for why they're not available, seeing as how the game has to bend over backwards and pull narrative conceits out of its ass just to justify why there are so many. And taking guns out of the equation would instantly negate some of the game's most serious problems. You would no longer be able to simply take out the big sledgehammer zombies just by shooting them in the head one or two times. There would be no elongated corridor shooter sections where you have to fight off swarms of human enemies with the incredibly mediocre shooting mechanics. Some of the most fun I had in this game was engaging in the legitimately fun melee duels with human enemies. The AI is smart enough to fight with, Techland obviously knows they're good at making good melee combat systems. Why am I only cutting out brain-dead zombies for most of the game? Oh yeah, there's a story too. Aspects of this game have a really bad habit of showing a lot of promise early on and then pissing themselves and dying about halfway through. The story is no exception to this. You are Kyle Crane, a man with ass cheeks of steel and the feet of Hermes. You are a super secret agent man who parachutes into Zombie City to retrieve a special government document from the bad guy. An intriguing concept, but it only gets better from there. At first, I was expecting this game's writing to be one of its strong points. The characters are all likable and to some extent multi-dimensional, to the point where you actually give a shit about them past the point of doing fetch quests or getting to see their tits. Jade is in a sense the cornerstone of the story, at once both a catalyst to the broader overarching plot events and at the same time a kawaii soon love interest that you can save and assert your male dominance over. What I find most interesting about Jade as a character is that she would be significantly more boring if she was a character in literally any game with more conventional writing. She's level-headed, strong, and intelligent, all traits which are incredibly scarce among the city's inhabitants. She is something of a necessity, a straight man to the other characters, and something of an anchor to the game's emotional elements. Next, there's Rahim, the reckless, brash one that just wants to blow shit up. He acts as the catalyst for most events in the first act of the game because he blows shit up and you have to fix it. And finally, we have Crane, the guy whose eyeballs you sit behind the entire game. And Crane as a character shows the most promise of all, appearing to be something of a subversive caricature of the standard white male video game protagonist, defying narrative tropes around every corner and lampshading some of the game's more mimetic elements. Even the game's stumbling mockery of an Andrew Ryan type villain seems to have some merit, and at some points even brings up some of Bioshock's questions pertaining to self-control and destiny, questions that are of course barely delivered on, just like the characters themselves. Dying Light really likes to flex its writing nuts in the early game, with some heavy emotional climaxes and genuinely entertaining little side stories. Even the main plot seemed to have some sense of direction at first, with Crane slowly becoming more and more exasperated at the agency he works for, carrying out increasingly questionable and uncomfortable tasks under the orders behind which the motivations are worrying at best. And then the game blows its fucking load after the death of a major character and basically trails off into meandering bullshit for 2 whole acts, vainly stroking its limp dick and forcing you through boring-ass sewer sections and pointless fetch quests for 10 or so more hours. What the actual fuck happened here? The story uses the poor excuse of the previously mentioned character's death to justify why Jade, the level-headed badass, suddenly becomes a fucking moron and leaves to another part of the city in mindless pursuit of some dumbass bullshit that the player eventually ends up taking care of anyway. And after a while, Crane's writing stops being self-aware and subversive, and he basically turns into Nathan Drake, but somehow less interesting, which is like breaking Mach 3 in terms of boring characters. Rise, the main antagonist, loses intrigue once he realizes that the game has zero intention of exploring the subjects he reiterates on ad nauseum, and from that point on, the main plot becomes terrible. How come after the biggest emotional climax of the story, instead of having the player return to the others and witness how the events affected the characters we've come to know and understand, the game tells us to fuck off to a completely different section of the city, introducing us to completely new characters that are exponentially less interesting than the ones we already knew? Why does the game's meta commentary completely disappear, instead moving to a plot that is completely incongruent with what this game was supposedly trying to accomplish beforehand? Why is the final boss fucking quick time goddamn? Dying Light did lots of things right, but I can't help feeling that it missed out on a lot of opportunities that could have made this game into something incredible, rather than something that's simply good. It has a fantastic parkour system that made both navigating its world incredibly fun and convenient, while also providing a challenge for more advanced players when needed. It improved upon the first-person combat formula that Dead Island brought to the table, which proved to be incredibly satisfying and well-tuned. It even snuck a full-on vagina into the game without it becoming a federal fucking issue somehow. So far, Techland has proven themselves as adept game developers that can learn from their flaws, as can be seen from the massive improvements the game delivered after the ambitious shit heap that was Dead Island, and the further improvements we've seen so far in Dying Light's fantastic DLC, The Following. Hell, even the definitive edition of Dead Island almost makes the game playable. I look forward to future projects from this talented team of developers, and in the meantime, I encourage you to share your thoughts on the video in the comments. Did you like it? Did you want to kill me? How many buckets of cum did you fill up jacking off to this? If you enjoy my content and wish to support me further, please consider donating to my Patreon. Thank you for watching, and have a good afternoon.
Shrunken head, broken legs, body parts on the concrete. Cut them up, butcher style gators in the swamp. Red light, leave them dead, running like a track meet. Scared of nobody, what your motherfuckers want. Believe me when I tell them I'm a boogeyman beast. Leave them slashed from their head to their feet. Pin bricks to the chest of a bitch.